So perhaps we can speak of a useful pointer and something to reflect on as well. First, on a useful pointer. About the way certain impressions which one way or another have become indispensable part of our sense of separate self and our identity, sense of identity, has incorporated or has it incorporated into itself. So in other words, certain impressions, certain experiences, they then in themselves already formed part of that what we consider ourselves to be, and this is what makes it so very subtle in terms of what goes into this identity and what comprises that internal perspective we have of ourselves. Even in psychology, we know that there is two selves always, two selves. One that we have, how we perceive ourselves, and another is how we are being perceived, and so it creates this internal and external faces. One that we don't show to anyone. In fact, it's not even a face. It's that notion we have of and about ourselves internally. There may be times, moments when we are willing to share that or kind of let in, but those are very rare moments. And on a daily basis, that how we are being perceived is that what that method acting, this is what we wear out into the world, creates that already certain split there, of course. So what comprises all that conglomerate also includes various undigested impressions, some of which are then later referred to as traumas. And this is where it becomes increasingly difficult to separate, if we are to address trauma, from that sense of identity, because that trauma is fully incorporated into our sense of whom we consider ourselves to be. You see? So that, whatever that was, it makes no difference, because this is where, again, another complexity is, some of it is very obvious, some of it is downright dramatic and traumatic, and could be tragic. It is the degree of how we were able to process that. We know plenty of examples throughout history, not just far away from us, but history, that what happened in our lifetimes, examples of people who displayed extraordinary sense of courage, extraordinary sense of resolve, when what maybe for others would be completely justified reason for being broken down, they, as it were, turn that into the advantage of growing tremendously. And we can give very dramatic examples, very dramatic examples. You know these examples yourself. And the most obvious ones, the people have suffered some traumas and came back from places where they suffer from, post-traumatic disorder and so forth. Various tragic events which cost someone, for example, legs, and they learn to live life completely in a totally different way than they were perhaps planning. And we know how in certain cases this went into the formation of their character. It strengthened that. It gave them the incentive to grow, overcome. It doesn't have to be so dramatic. It could be something which is less dramatic, maybe less physical in its kind of mutilating aspect, as it's easier to speak. It could be something which was accompanied by deep sense of loss, psychological and otherwise, growing up, not in a place where that is filled with conducive atmosphere, where there was not enough of this or that, not enough, above all else, maybe care, love, attention, maybe absence of one parent or both. And we know again that how for some people this became the source of their strength rather than the reason for their destruction. And we also know the bizarre examples of the totally opposite, how in a seemingly conducive for one's well-being atmosphere, seemingly, because of course we can speculate that, how do you know how it actually was? Because all this, one way or another, boils down to personal experience. A perfect family, perfect setup, and yet one sibling grows up being not loved, feeling jealousy already at the early age, competition, competing for that love, competing for that attention. No drama here, and yet growing up into harmed individual already full of begrudges, full of sense of inadequacy. So what goes into this is amount of that light which able to illumine. And that light is also that same very spark of fire which metabolizes and burns, assimilates all these experiences. So what happens in the case when it goes deep under and becomes part of one's identity? This becomes very difficult to acknowledge and work on that level where what perhaps is understood to be the reason, but that very reason already forms part of that identity. In other words, that traumatic experience, that undigested experience, indispensable part of who one thinks of oneself, to put it this way. So therefore this term here, indulgence in one's own sense of inadequacy. This is an important reminder when it comes to process of freeing oneself from all this what inhibits our sense of freedom. And it's that very subtle indulgence. It doesn't have to display or represent itself in carrying placards, which some of us do, inevitably, and literally going on the street with that, almost, wearing it as a badge of honor. And then it's nearly impossible to assimilate that experience. In other words, to digest that experience, which definitely there, a predicament, an obstacle, a block, a kind of coagulated set of whatever that is, when it's a toxic stuff. Just like any toxicity results in some form of imbalance, and the body doesn't want to allow that for it to spread, so it will coagulate that in the form of this or that. It will, in trying to prevent the spread of that, it will make it into whatever that may be. In not unlike manner, at a subtle level, that's what happens to this. And of course, it is there. So that indulgence need to be seen through, need to be acknowledged, recognized, because it's part and parcel of transformation of consciousness when we encounter these nodes and nodules where that sense of indulgence coming up as that psychological response, where it protects itself. It protects itself now as this is part of who I am. Without that part, right, I kind of like don't feel maybe even special anymore. I don't feel, you remove that part and a huge chunk of what I consider myself is going to leave me feeling burned, feeling, it's like an important limb is amputated. Indulgence in indulgence can be in anything, right? One can indulge in anything. Indulgence can be seen here more lightly. One can, why don't you indulge yourself in a nice spa treatment? That's fine, right? Then in a spa, let's go and indulge. You wouldn't do that every single day, right? So yes, there's of course way of language, and you can indulge in something, I don't know, in a tub of ice cream in a hot day, right? It's not something that you would eat every day, 365 days, right? So, But indulgence here, spoken from the perspective of secretly enjoying that trauma, causing, rather going with the pact that it has created. And that pact already it's this strong alliance. And of course, all the complaints comes that one wants to be free, one wants to be free. But up until that alliance is there, up until one is indulging in that pain, even in the pain itself, one can indulge in the pain, then it prevents one from what is here as one's birthright, to enjoy the freedom from all causation. So that's just a useful reminder, and indulgence, of course, also could be linked to all forms of dependency and obsessions. Because whenever we indulge in something, if it comes from very, very strong sense of not being dependent on that, then it has no sway. But here we speak of something which has the potential to secretly, as I just said, support that, support the very dynamics. And in the work that today is being kind of a talk of town, right? Very, very much a part of the conversation in spiritual community, the work on traumas. We hear more about it than certainly before. It's this revival of that importance of, and also a recognition and realization that somehow we've inherited a lot of traumas. And these traumas, up until they are unprocessed, they will act themselves and will be known. And so it's a kind of where some people in the field of health, well-being, in these professions, psychology and psychiatry, from the holistic perspective, not the psychiatry of the medical system, which simply doesn't know how to treat this. Nobody knows how to treat trauma in allopathic medicine, because trauma is not treated. What is treated is the symptomatology. And treating symptomatology is simply pushing it further and deeper into the subtler and subtler compartments of our nervous system. And if you suppress, it's at the expense of suppressing symptomatology. That's not dealing with trauma. But in this work, right, because this is a pointer, in this work, as a reminder, encountering this, it can be a blessing in disguise. When the field opens up, it can be very clearly tapped into. It can present itself, sometimes very crystal clear, almost as it is. You can see that almost as a physical object. You can look at it from any dimension. At other times, maybe less acutely, more vaguely, more in a sense of that something you stumbled on that. What to do? What's the attitude? What is our predisposition? This, whenever something has to do with anything that causes us pain, And we touched up on that yesterday, just briefly with regard to what to do in meditation. It's not that we are advised to go and analyze it. See, there's a subtle difference between going there with this analytical kind of perspective, but simply giving it warm, loving attention. Do you feel the difference? You're simply not ignoring it. You're not brushing it off, no trying to bypass it, no trying to pretend it's not there, no try to dismiss it. Simply give it attention, just that, attention. Okay? And you will see how it gets literally merged with your own consciousness. It merged with your own awareness. And when that happens, we speak of complete integration of whatever that experience is. It is still there in the memory. You know what happened. There's no such thing as, yes, it was whatever it was that caused this dis-ease, discomfort, pain, suffering, sometimes not knowing. But when that happens, then it no longer impacts, no longer impedes your sense in this regard, and with respect to whatever that was, how it could have affected. And with that, it frees the very territory where that identity is much more difficult to transcend up until our personal story is burdened by all this, what we consider to be somehow less than okay, less than perfect, less than what that is. You see how knot is tied here? Knot is tied by this knot of identity. Is tied by that sense that something happened to me. Something happened. And that causes tightening of that. It reinforces that sense of identity. Whereas the job here is to loosen it up, first and foremost. Loosen it up